Welcome back, everyone. This is Wisdom and the Brain. It's part of the evidence-based wisdom series that we're doing. Tom and Charlie Cassidy here. Charlie, wisdom and the brain. I mean, as scientists, we're obviously fascinated by how the neurology of the brain might influence wisdom. What have you got to share on that?
Well, I'll be upfront and full disclosure. Most of what we're going to be talking about over the next few minutes is going to be stuff that I have culled from one specific excellent talk, which I recommend everyone have a look at, which was a talk done by Dr. Dilip Jesti, who is the director of the Stein Institute for Research on Aging at the University of California.
Okay.
This talk in 2010, where he sort of outlined this idea that if wisdom appears to be so similar in different cultures from different periods in history and different geographical locations across the planet, maybe that's because there's a neurological, biological basis for wisdom. And he
our livers kind of tend to work the same wherever we are on the planet.
Right,
so
right.
Why not our brains?
Exactly. Yeah. So he's kind of pioneer of this concept. And he first established, he was the first person who came up with this, did a literature review, came up with this short list of 6 components of wisdom, wise behavior as such. And then he was like, how do we work out which parts of the brain are responsible for these wise behaviors? And as is often the case with sort of brain research, they work backwards. So they say, okay, this is wise behavior. Let's see what has been damaged when that wise behavior disappears. So if certain parts of the brain atrophy or damage in an accident, and a specific behavior associated with wisdom disappears from that person's character, then there's a high likelihood that that part of the brain, that region of the brain is responsible for that behavior. So that was his kind of approach.
Okay, excellent. Just on a side note, why do we think there's so much focus on regions of the brain, as if, regions of the brain are responsible in their entirety for particular characteristics? Why do you think we think that?
Well, I think that's a little bit of an old-fashioned way of looking at it, isn't it? Yeah. And as we'll talk about this a little bit further, wise behavior seems to be a balancing of the functions of various different parts of the brain. We'll come on to that in a little bit. But you're right, you can't really look at one particular region in isolation.
Yeah. I mean, just as an aside, but you did find that there, in this research, you did find that there were some interesting things, the conclusions.
Yeah, absolutely. So he comes up with a really nice metaphor for explaining how these various regions work in harmony to ultimately achieve what we would call wise behavior. So looking at a few, some accidents through history and looking at various
always the way with brain studies, isn't it?
Iron bars going through people's eyeballs, and they suddenly become selfish. I wonder if that part of the brain has something to do with being generous. So also not only accidents but also certain diseases. So there's frontotemporal dementia, which is something which you have an onset in the 50s, and rather than Alzheimer's, which tends to be associated with memory loss, there is with frontotemporal dementia, there's a big personality change. And people that suffer from this, all of a sudden, from being very balanced people, they often exhibit poor social decision making, impulsive behavior, lack of empathy, poor insight, and this is the opposite of wisdom. So that you could say what is being damaged in their brains is probably responsible
with wisdom. Yeah, exactly.
So various regions were identified through this process, and Jesti, this doctor, talks about a really nice metaphor which I've found really useful, which is the brain as a family. And he talks about so the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that is responsible for rational behavior, essentially.
Okay.
One of the newest parts of the brain. And he considers that in the family model, you could say that is the cold, rational father figure. Yeah, it's slightly sort of sexist, but helpful nonetheless.
Yeah.
Then another of the regions that was identified as helpful or useful for wise behavior is the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. Again, this is prefrontal cortex, newest part of the brain. This area seems to be responsible for emotional, empathetic behavior.
Okay.
So in this model, he talks about being the nurturing mother.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Then the anterior cingulate cortex. Again, we're talking newest part of the brain.
Yeah.
He talks about it as the uncle or aunt figure who mediates and resolves conflict between your rational part of your brain, the father figure, and the more emotional, compassionate part of the brain, ventromedial prefrontal cortex. So it's the link and the arbitrator when those two things conflict. And then finally, he talks about, also important in this family metaphor, is the idea of the limbic part of the brain, which just is directing you towards seeking pleasure. So he considers that
grandparents.
Yeah,
he have some sweeties.
Yeah, he considers it like a friend. Yeah, so someone who's not really worried about doing the right thing. They're just trying to make sure you're happy.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's a really great metaphor. But the overall thing to take away from it is the limbic brain is the oldest part of your brain, and then the prefrontal cortex, the newest part of your brain. So wisdom or wise behavior, he views it as the balance that takes place between the different parts of your brain in order to advance your personal interests and the interests of the society with which you're in. So different parts of the brain with their different motivations, their different functionalities are all called into play in balance to achieve wise behavior.
That sounds great. Love it. Okay, so what can we do? Is there anything we can do with this, or is this just, again, it's quite early?
I mean, all brain research is really early. Wisdom research is a young field. Brain research is still relatively young.
Exactly.
So we're really kind of at the edge of things here. But it's very exciting that they seem to be able to be beginning to identify a biological basis for, what 30 years ago was considered the provision of the realm of philosophy.
Of course. Fantastic. All right. Well, again, more information on evidencebasedwisdom.com. Thanks very much for that, Charlie. Nice one.